I said a while back that I really wanted to do a reaction video for the IGN top 100 Nintendo games of all time. I was very curious about doing it. I knew it would be like a controversial thing. I really really wanted to like talk about it like the instant it went live, but unfortunately I was busy and couldn't do it. I'm working very hard on my book and like my personal life stuff and like doing things. So it was very, very difficult for me to find the time to do it. But I did see the backlash to the number one entry, and it does need to be celebrated. IGN just had a very rare W in which they declared Tears of the Kingdom the greatest Nintendo game ever made. And I have to salute them. You know, we have to like salute IGN for what they did here, like how they went about this, how they executed it, like how they made so many pretendos seethe. You know, like in a split second, the entire giant cope we had they had built up around Tears of the Kingdom, the idea that it was some disappointing disaster that nobody cares about, that nobody remembers, that everyone is disappointed by. It is just completely collapsed. You know, we now have like two different groups of people who hate Tears of the Kingdom. You know, you have Breath of the Wild noobs, like baby plebs or like fanboys. Like you have those guys who just believe Tears of the Kingdom was a lazy rehash. But secondly, you have the people who think Breath of the Wild wasn't a real Zelda game and was some massive disappointment and was a massive step down from what Nintendo did before. And obviously, both of these sides are wrong. The objective truth is that like both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom were industry-defining classics that far surpass shit like Baldur's Gate 3, Elden Dingaling, Skyrim. Like we've seen like The Bitcher 3. We've seen all these games just come and go while Nintendo is standing strong. They got their sequel out before Skyrim 2 could be made. Witcher 4 they couldn't even remake The Witcher 1 before Tears of the Kingdom came out. Cyberpunk 2077 failed. Like we have seen like all of these companies just collapse and just embarrass themselves over the past decade while Nintendo just kills it all the time. Like it is embarrassing to see how many people were adamant that Tears of the Kingdom was a failure, that it didn't take off, that nobody was talking about it. It's over 2 years old now, like almost 2.5 years old. Actually, it is 2.5 years old. 2.5 years old, and I'm still talking about it. Like that cope was dead and in the ground before it ever became a thing. But you saw so many people like insist it was the truth. They insisted that they had like a top secret information that this game that sold 20 million units somehow failed in the marketplace, that somehow nobody was talking about it, that no one was excited about it. Like that was completely and total delusion. And now that we've seen kind of the same thing happen with like the Switch 2 and Mario Kart World and DK Bonanza, right? Where you saw the same kind of narrative is that like, well, nobody's talking about it. Like we are reaching the day when that cope is like is completely in the ground. Like it is the most embarrassing thing I have ever seen in my life. Just like it's like gotcha fans doing this. Like, well, I don't dump hundreds of dollars into so I can collect waifu figurines for my garden and like who cares? Who cares about your waifus? Like that's the kind of people we're dealing with here. Is people who spend like all their time like hyping up Nikkei as some like pinnacle of gaming instead of like really acknowledging the existence of the far superior games that exist all the time. Like it's a phenomenon now that the most talked about games online are shit like the horse girl thing and like Nikkei, and it's just like stuff with no real gameplay. All you're doing in those games is talking online about like I'd like to do lewd things to her. Like that is what talking about games means online. It just means simping for underage horse girls. Okay. That's where we're at in the gaming sphere. Like, people not talking about games online means absolutely nothing. In fact, I would argue people talking about games online are just like viral shills and bots. People reading ads, okay? Like, there's no way any of this stuff we've seen propped up over the past decade is as big as Breath of the Wild or Tears, and yet we're supposed to believe that they're like way bigger and that Nintendo's on the way out and that like I don't know, Genshin Impact is going to take over. Like Black Myth Wukong, like remember when Black Myth Wukong was supposed to be like this huge deal, and then it just completely collapsed, and now no one talks about it. Good example. Okay, like all the games that you see people talking about are just AstroTurf shills, and actual success stories like Tears of the Kingdom don't really need that kind of fake marketing. And that's kind of what we're seeing now is that Nintendo is succeeding in spite of not spending a ton of money in all this fake marketing and like, gassing people up and just like getting people like riled up over nonsense. Like Tears of the Kingdom sold itself on its own merits and stayed relevant because of just how much more technically advanced and better than it was than Skyrim. And that's just like the situation we're in now is that there's this very strong refusal from the community to acknowledge that like Zelda has surpassed Skyrim, that it surpassed GTA, that it surpassed like all these other fantasy properties, The Witcher 3. Like there's this really stubborn refusal to like accept it. And I think that mindset's going to carry over to like downplaying the movie and future Zelda products. And I'm very concerned at like what point, I've talked about this for a while about how Zelda is infinitely better than Lord of the Rings, and that's something that's like super controversial for a lot of people, especially since I am a fantasy author. But it is true. Zelda has been able to grow and evolve far past what Tolkien introduced with his novel. We Zelda is a franchise that is constantly expanding, constantly doing new things, constantly experimenting, constantly evolving, while Tolkien is very, very, very much stuck in the past. And that's not a bad thing at all. I love Lord of the Rings, but at the same time, Zelda is way bigger than it. Harry Potter is way bigger than it. Like Pokemon is way bigger than it. Like, why can we just not acknowledge the reality that the Legend of Zelda games are popular? Like, the problem with that, and this is the issue that people have, is that the instant Zelda is acknowledged as being the best in the industry, like the entire giant grift around hating Nintendo games is going to collapse. The only reason more people don't play Nintendo games is because everyone actively like discourages them from doing it. Like through methods like this, like crying about how Tears was a failure or was a rehash of Breath of the Wild and how Breath of the Wild wasn't that good anyway. Like this is like a typical like snoy marketing tactic. While they try and steer you into getting Ghost of your toy instead, but the reality is, game journal propaganda doesn't work nearly as effectively as it used to, and I think we're kind of seeing that in like with these kind of situations. Is that like Tears of the Kingdom was very heavily downplayed by most gaming outlets. Everybody obsessively hated it. Everybody celebrated when Baldur's Gate 3 was granted the Game of the Year award. And what happened? Like Tears of the Kingdom outperformed it. It stayed relevant longer. It'll get a sequel quicker. It'll get a live action movie. Like, what exactly is Baldur's Gate 3 going to do to ever compete with that? That's just kind of my opinion at this point is that like the Game of the Year award means nothing because Nintendo games stay relevant long after the year they were released. The game I've played one of the games I played the most this year, Animal Crossing New Horizons, like that came out in 2020 and I'm still playing it. They gave The Last of Us Part 2 the Game of the Year that year and nobody cared. Same deal with Tears of the Kingdom. Okay, you are going to be seeing a lot of this in the near future, where you're going to see like game journos hype up all sorts of crazy, nonsensical things. They'll bend over backwards trying to shill for like all sorts of random stuff. Like they'll do like Arc Raiders. I think is the flavor of the month thing right now. They're gonna throw everything they have at it, and yet when all is said and done, Hi-Fi Rush was hyped up as some huge industry success, and Tango GameWorks was supposed to be some huge developer for Microsoft, and they shut them down. Oh, but the IP has been saved. Someone else has swooped in and saved them, and that's not going anywhere either. Nobody cares. That's just one example, but it's a very poignant one. It's something that I've noticed. It's something that I've brought up over the years. Something I've talked about time and time again. Like, there is no denying it, but the rest of the gaming industry is terrified of Nintendo's endless successes.